Hello and welcome to Books and Us, the podcast about learning about new ideas and getting inspiration from books. I'm Ranjit Monga, and every week I talk to authors of books in the non-fiction category, from which we can get a wealth of knowledge and information. If you would like to read about the podcast interviews, you can visit the website www.globalbihari.com and search for the column Literary Speaking.
The larger philosophical question really is, why do we consider anything that's not a human being to be such a pest or such a nuisance? Because oftentimes animals don't want anything to do with us, really. They just want to go about their business, and they don't really want to confront us, including leopards. I think what happens, Ranjit, is that the more intolerant we are towards each other or towards wild animals, I think it just creates an aggression in us, which is perhaps not required.
So, hello all, welcome to another episode of podcast Books and Us. Today, we are going to look at our world from the point of view of wildlife, which is a fascinating aspect of a planet. The book we are going to talk about is Wild and Wilful, which has captivated the hearts of nature lovers and conservationists. It talks about a few prominent wild animals which are finding it extremely difficult to survive in the wild. The book highlights the struggles, triumphs, and the intricate ecosystems which they inhabit. The author is Neha Sinha, who uses vivid storytelling skills and her deep understanding of ecology to tell these stories. These are among the most poignant animal stories I have read in recent times. Wild and Willful is also a crucial reminder of why conservation efforts are more important than ever in the face of increasing urbanization and climate change. Neha, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Ranjiv. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining, Neha. Neha is a well known conservationist and writer known for her passionate advocacy for wildlife protection. She began her career as a journalist with the Indian Express. Driven by her love for wildlife conservation, she went on to do her Master of Science in Biodiversity, Conservation and Management at Oxford University. She has worked with the Bombay Natural History Society and is now with the World Wildlife Fund in New Delhi. She continues to write on the environment and its conservation in publications like The Hindu, Economic and Political Weekly, and the India Today Group. So, Neha, what is this book about?
Thank you for that introduction. This book is about the way our lives are interwoven with the lives of wild animals around us. This book is about how living in India, one of the most important aspects of our life is not just the food and the culture and the clothing, but also the way wild animals cross into our lives. So, whether it's a leopard that comes into a campus in Dehradun, whether it's a tiger that comes near people as it crosses highways, whether it's elephants that cross railway lines, or whether it's birds that come into our garden. This book looks at 15 wild species in India which need conservation attention. Some of these are endangered species, such as the tiger, the elephant, and the leopard, the great Indian bustard, which is this giant bird that lives in the deserts of Rajasthan. But some of them also are common species that are still amongst us in good numbers, such as the plain tiger butterfly, which is basically the orange and black butterfly that we've all seen in our
Mhm.
childhoods. Or whether it's the rosy starling, which is a still plentiful migratory bird that comes to India every year to spend winter here. So, this is a book that basically tries to capture both the lives of the wild animal as well as the lives of people whose lives these animals cross.
One of the most intriguing stories which you have talked about are leopards, because one can see leopards stories about leopards quite frequently in newspapers. And like, I live in the NCR region in Greater Noida, and here there are talks of leopard visiting societies, or a leopard having been heard. So this is something which is a reality, especially in the on the periphery of urban areas. So why and how do you think that society should deal with them?
Right. So, if we look a couple of generations ago, there was a much more perhaps acceptance of living along with larger animals in the landscape. The landscape tended to be permeable. So, in our ancestral houses
Mhm.
or homes with our families, we might have heard of elephants coming nearby, or leopards, or even tigers and bison, not bison, gore, etc. Now, what's happening today is that we've built up our cities in a way that seems to exclude nature. So we find it very odd or very amazing if an animal comes near us. And in fact, our cities are not just cities which are kind of collections of buildings, but they also are part of a larger landscape. So, for example,
Mhm.
when you speak of Greater Noida,
Mhm.
it's not far from the Aravalli Hill Range. It's not
Mhm.
far from even the mountains, the Shivaliks of the Himalayas, which basically are leopard habitat. Leopards also are extremely adaptable cats. They are able to take prey from a wide variety of places. They live near fields, they live near forests, they live near places where there are people. So even in Bombay, even in Guwahati, and in Delhi, we do have leopards. Now the question is, how can we live in a manner that we don't feel an intense rivalry with each other? So, the answer to that is that there are many ways in which we can avoid actually confrontation with a leopard. I think one of the worst thing that people do is that when they see a wild animal, because they think cities
Mhm.
are only for people, they have a very antagonistic view of that animal, and they try
Mhm.
to kill it, or they try to confront it. And that's when conflict really happens, when people try to pick up sticks and beat an animal. Perhaps to its death. And actually, leopards live amongst us, and we don't even get to know that they're there.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, they're as silent as ghosts. So, what we need to do is to re educate ourselves as to how we can avoid having encounters with such animals. It's simple things like having lighting in the places that we live in, so that normally at twilight, when an animal like a leopard is active, we can see where we are going. Simple things like controlling the dog population, because leopards do eat a lot of stray dogs. Almost a very large amount of the diet of the leopards of Bombay, for example, is from the dogs around Sanjay Gandhi National Park. So, if we want to, if we as a society decide that there should be no leopards around us, then
Mhm.
we do need to take away the triggers, which are the dogs and the garbage.
Mhm.
And but if we think that it's all right to coexist, as many people do coexist, people who live in tea estates and coffee estates in various parts of India coexist with leopards, in which they do the simple things like having light, walking in groups in the night, and both leopards and people are able to live. The larger philosophical question really is, why do we consider anything that's not a human being to be such a pest,
Mhm.
or such a nuisance? Because oftentimes animals don't want anything to do with us, really. They
Mhm.
just want to go about their business, and they don't really want to confront us, including leopards.
Mhm. And you have shown in the book that not having that attitude of coexisting with the wildlife around us, how dangerous can it be for the wildlife? And there's so many leopards who get killed every year.
Yes, yes, that's true. In fact, we're speaking of NCR around Delhi. There was a
Mm.
leopard that entered a courtroom in Ghaziabad, not very far back in time, and
Mm.
it was obviously a displaced and confused animal, and people were hitting it with sticks. I think what happens, Ranjit, is that the more intolerant we are towards each other or towards wild animals,
Mm.
I think it just creates an aggression in us, which
Mm.
is perhaps
Mm.
not required. Because
Mm.
if we learn to live with tolerance, obviously it means
Mm.
that we are moving towards a more evolved state, right? So,
Mm.
for example, there could be wasps in your garden, and you
Mm.
could either take the view that let it be there, let the
Yeah.
let
Mm.
the young ones, emerge, and the
Mm.
wasp will leave by
Mm.
themselves.
Mm.
Or we can take the view that there should be no wasps around me, in which you
Mm.
will go and you will
Mm.
basically destroy the nest. And because our lives are connected with nature, and because so much of what we do comes from nature, our food comes from the soil, our milk
Mm.
comes from, the stomachs of animals, and
Mm.
a healthy life is never complete without clean air, without seeing greenery around us. So we are actually a part of nature. So I think it makes sense for us to find ways to coexist rather than to constantly keep battling, what we consider the enemy.
Mm.
Yeah.
And you have also talked about the elephants and
Yes.
how vividly you have captured the image of an elephant and her calf. They're being chased by people who are throwing coals, burning coals at them, and their bodies are half burned.
Yeah.
So the elephants also face this situation, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, just today I have an op-ed out in the paper talking about the dichotomy that we have for elephants. Elephants are
Mm,
such an interesting example of how, we kind of revere something and love it, but we also kind of hate it sometimes. So, it's looked at as something that's like a living god. But
mm,
it's also looked at as a pest or as competition. The problem arises when we see it taking away something that we think is our own. So, for example, those elephants you're talking about are from North Bengal, were from
mm,
North Bengal.
mm,
And they were basically, they come into the paddy fields or the crop fields
mm,
and in the night. And, for the elephant, that's just food. But for us, we look at it like it's a thief, right?
mm,
Because
mm,
we think it's taking away our commodity, it's taking away our livelihood, perhaps.
mm,
And what's happening is that we have these hula parties that basically are basically a group of people who drive elephants away from fields. But this has become a very problematic practice because
mm,
basically they're just chasing elephants all the time. And
mm,
that makes the elephants also quite aggressive.
mm,
In this instance that I write about in the book, what happened is that they chase the herd, they throw, balls of fire, and the herd keeps running away. And sometimes what happens is the herd goes into a railway line and gets killed because there's a train that's coming.
mm,
Sometimes it happens it can't cross a highway. So,
mm,
it's a multitude of factors. It's almost like a death by a thousand cuts because here you have people chasing you, there you have a train or a car. So the entire landscape becomes non-conducive for such an animal. And this is
mm.
an animal that needs to eat 150 kilos of food every day.
Yeah, yeah.
Such animals eat a lot. And so therefore, what we need then is to ensure that they can have safe passage between the areas that are their habitat. What we have to do is find ways of perhaps looking at schemes in which we give crop
Mm,
compensation to people on time. So if people have lost their crop for elephants, two
mm,
elephants, they need to be compensated. We can have many certification schemes in which we can have crops in which people are given a premium
mm,
for not harming elephants. So if
mm,
I'm growing rice in my field and elephants are coming and feeding, then I know that I will lose a certain percentage of my crop to the elephant. The
mm,
rest of the I won't harm the elephant, but the rest of the crop, I will sell it at a premium as a wildlife friendly product in which no elephants were harmed. This is
mm,
something that is working in certain parts of the world, and I think we
mm.
need to try these kind of innovative approaches. With all of these kind of approaches, there are ways to solve the problem. We basically have to go beyond the stick and the fireball.
From the point of view of the animals, you have also talked about how they feel.
Yes.
Just a small example, you have talked how elephants, the new generation of elephants which are being born and who are seeing this violence around them, are growing up to be more aggressive and think naturally of humans as enemies.
Yeah. So this is not something that we know conclusively, but this is a guess that many studies have
Mhm,
made. Elephants are very long-lived and they have very long memories as well. As they say, elephants never forget is a saying, and I think it's true. So, researchers have seen that in a place where elephants have had conflict, their body language changes. They become very alert. They become very, sort of on guard.
mhm,
And yes, elephants that have their herds killed are like almost like children of war. They are confused because usually what happens is the calf stays with the herd. It
mm,
stays with its mother and aunts, and they bring the calf up and they basically teach it what it must eat and what are the passages, migratory passages to follow, etc. And if the mother dies or the aunts die or the herd dies, the elephant definitely is disoriented. It might,
mhm,
feel that people are
Mm.
aggressors. Very recently, it happened that 10 elephants died in
Yes,
Bandhavgarh.
yes.
Very tragic incident. They were
Mm.
eating millets, and I think the millets had fungus on them,
Mhm.
and they all died. And there was only one calf that was left in that herd, and there are also reports there was one male elephant,
Mm.
but that's it. So there's one calf, and it was crying for days on end. And it's a very deeply bonded animal. So I have myself seen that a calf has died and the mother is pulling the dead body because she refuses to let go of
Mm.
the calf. And elephants also bury
Mm.
their dead.
Mm.
New papers and new research shows that they're such sentient animals that when a herd member dies, they bury that member. They make a grave and they bury it. So they're very deeply bonded and very emotional, sentient animals. So they need those close bonds to grow up in the way
Mhm.
that people do. In the way people need family units to grow up and become well-adjusted members of society. So,
Mhm.
yes, the more conflict we have, the more we throw fire at them, the more wary they become of us. So, it might lead to a situation in which either the elephant becomes more scared of us, but it's also possible that it might become more aggressive towards us, which is why I'm
Mm.
suggesting that we need to have different kind of innovative approaches which go beyond just hitting something with a stick.
Okay, so you have talked about the what can be done at the official level, but down at the grassroots, I think your story on Sariska highlights that as long as we don't change the mindset of people on the ground, people who interact with these animals on a day-to-day basis, things will not change. So, what were your lessons from Sariska?
So I did my field research in Sariska, and in Wild and Wilful, I write about how the tigers had gone extinct from Sariska. It
Mm-hmm.
was the first reserve in India to lose all its tigers to poaching. And there are many villages in Sariska. Some of the villages don't want a tiger because they feel, having a tiger brings a protection regime, which they don't want the tiger to kill their cattle because there's so many cattle. Again, as I said,
Mm-hmm.
elephants taking our crop. For the elephant, it's just food, right? And for us,
Mm-hmm.
it's a thief. So a tiger eating someone's buffalo, or a tiger eating someone's cow, it's just like a tiger hunting. For the tiger, it's just food. But for us, he's a murderer or a thief again.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, there are reports that the villagers had poisoned a tiger that was brought in from Ranthambore to
Mm-hmm.
restart the tiger population. Now, this does happen in many parts of India. There is a disconnect between the grander conservation scheme and what is happening at the local level. And again, the answers have to be very contextual and they have to be very specific for that place. So we need to be able to work with people and take them along in this decision. So what had happened in Sariska is people were not even told properly that the tigers will be brought back. They were not told properly
Okay.
what compensation schemes. So I mean, the very first thing we need to do is to make sure people have the information because it is going to change their life, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
need to kind of not look at it as a top-down thing. It has to be a participative thing. And again, if something like a buffalo is dying or a cow has been killed, giving prompt compensation really makes a difference. So making the process simple rather than complicated, making sure they get the money on time. It is happening now successfully in many states of India. So it needs to happen everywhere. Because at the end of the day, the farmer wants his cattle back, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what he wants. He might not actually hate the tiger. He might not actually
Mm-hmm.
harbor ill will towards the tiger. There are also parts of India where people want to move away from tiger reserves because they find their life to be isolated. It's different in different places. In Sariska, a lot of them told me they wanted to move. So they need to be given assistance to move if that's what they want, so that they can live a life where they have better facilities outside the forest as well.
Mm-hmm. You have also talked about Sioni in Madhya Pradesh, where the tiger is almost revered as a tigress is known to be the mother of man
Yeah.
because of their mythology. So there is also that side of the story where people revere tigers and they have no problem with them. So, what is that like, and what can be learned from them? Which can be replicated for this man and animal conflict, to be tolerated at least at that level.
Right. Yeah, you're right. And there are so many communities in India that look at not just tigers, but other animals as well as almost like cousins or almost like gods. So many parts of India, the one I'm referring to here is the Gond community in central
Mhm.
India that
Mhm.
reveres tigers. And they see the tiger as this powerful animal that basically rules the forest. And even in Sariska, there were many villages
Mhm.
where really liked the tiger, and it was interesting. They were very scared of the tiger, but they also loved it. And
Mhm.
sometimes, that kind of reverence comes, it's very complex. You love
Mhm.
it, but you also fear it, and
Mhm.
but you also want it to be there. You don't want a life without it. And so the Goan community, for example, definitely looks at the tiger as a protector. There are many other communities in India, even the Korkus
Mhm.
look at the tiger favorably. Korkus of Melghat, the Mishmi in Arunachal look at the tiger as a revered elder or a revered figure. So, what we learn from here is that there are already traditional systems of knowledge
Mhm.
which
Okay.
are very, very closely bound to conservation principles. So we need to
Mhm.
be able to, as I said, take these people along when we are making our conservation plans, and they can actually contribute and make the dimensions of the conservation much more interesting
Mhm.
and much more rich. And that's what we need to do. And so many times, tribal people have joined hands with the forest departments and successfully led lives which are better because they are now connected with the systems of production. So, for example, there are many crops that come or many
Mhm.
products that come from the forest, whether it's honey that comes from the forest, whether it's mahua liquor, certain kinds of medicinal plants which are used in pharmaceutical industry. So what we need to do then is to ensure, as similar to what I was saying earlier about
Mhm.
wildlife friendly crops, we have to give them distribution networks. We have to make sure their crops get a good premium because we don't want over exploitation. We want the forest to be reasonably intact. We want them to be able to continue their
Mhm.
traditional work, which is taking this
Mhm.
product. Therefore, we need to give them a better marketing answer. We need to give them good prices.
Mhm.
Uh, what used to happen earlier is that a lot of conservation happened isolated from the destinies of these people who live in the forest. And now we understand better that we need to work together, basically, that their
And
philosophies get the uh, recognition and exposure that they deserve.
yeah, and you talked about their philosophy that they think of an animal as a person and not uh,
Yes,
not not as an animal.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So that, I've heard it in so many parts of India.
Mhm.
In Hindi we say ye kya hai, like if it's an animal,
Mhm.
and they say ye kaun hai, and
Ah.
they say, it's almost like a who. It's a who. It's not a what.
Mhm.
So that comes from their close connections with nature. They
Mhm.
also revere trees because so much of their life is dependent on 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 nature. And also they know how to avoid conflict with animals. So people who live in the forest obviously must be encountering or do encounter bears and tigers and
Mhm.
elephants, snakes, but they know how to live with them. They know how to avoid conflict with them.
Mhm.
And in many parts of India, conflict gets created because people don't know what to do around
Mhm.
an
Mhm.
animal. And I guess, if you have an animal that's a neighbor and you've seen it your whole life,
Yeah.
uh, it seems very familiar. And you also understand. So many people have said to me in many parts of my ethnographic studies that the tiger will never harm you, that, it's a
Mhm.
gentleman. Jim Corbett called the
Mhm.
tiger a gentleman. And I think many
Mhm.
tribal people have said something similar, which is that,
Mhm.
it goes about its business and we go about our business, and we know, what boundaries to keep, and everything is fine. In fact, in Sariska, many people said they wanted the tiger
Mhm.
because it protected the forest, because
Uh-huh.
they felt that it prevented outsiders from coming into the forest.
Yeah, and also putting across this philosophy of thinking of an animal as a person can completely change the perception. If you're trying to educate or create awareness. And you talked about the example of Avni, the tigress. And she
Yes,
overnight became a celebrity. She was a person who was trying to protect her cubs, and so many people came out in her support.
yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Avni issue was a little complicated because,
Mm,
Avni lived in a very disturbed area, and
mm,
it is true that she had killed people. And I
mm,
think, at the point where any animal is habitually killing people, that animal
mm.
needs to be removed. I think,
Yeah, I'm just saying that
yes,
just making her into a person
yes.
changed so much for that animal.
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
it kind of you kind of see the world through the eyes
Mm,
of the animal. If you see
mm,
the animal as a person, then
mm,
you're able to see the world through
mm,
the
mm,
animal's eyes, and then you kind of see that it's just trying to survive, provide for its children, provide for its cubs, and
mm.
just kind of make a life in this difficult world, really.
And another animal that you have also talked about is the rhesus monkey. All of us living in cities or near cities have encountered monkeys or encounter them on a day-to-day basis. Just yesterday we had two monkeys sitting on a balcony. Uh,
Yeah.
so what is it? What is it that we should know about them, which is important?
So I think rhesus is a very interesting, interesting animal because they're too smart, perhaps, for their own
Mm.
good. They know how to open doors and they know how to open refrigerators. We also feed them in large numbers, and then we don't want them around us. And we feed them in temples. We feed them
Mm,
outside the forest with lots of bananas. But then we also don't want them. I think there's a lot of habitat loss that's happened
mm,
for rhesus. So, for
mm,
example, the Delhi Ridge once had a lot of fruit trees and a lot of good trees, but there's a big
mm,
invasive tree in the Delhi Ridge, which is the Vilayati kikar, which
mm,
does not provide food sources, adequate food sources for the monkey. And they get displaced a lot. At the same time, they also do very well in terms of their population going up. And I think for
mm,
the rhesus, we do have to consider whether we need to do some kind of population control.
mm,
And there are some contraceptives that are being tried out for monkeys because
mm,
they used to live in areas which had a lot more predators which would eat the monkeys, but now
mm,
we have less predators, right? So
mm,
it's not like the tigers and leopards around us all the time.
mm,
So it seems to be doing almost too well, also augmented by the fact that we feed them regularly,
mm,
right? So, I mean, if you're encountering a rhesus, don't look at it,
mm,
don't charge at it, don't throw a stick at it, just don't look at it and keep going and you'll be
mm,
fine.
mm,
Normally they don't attack, but
mm,
yes, they are very comfortable with us,
mm,
and people also seem to be very comfortable with them. And
mm,
every time, right underneath the signs that say don't feed monkeys,
mm,
people are feeding monkeys.
mm,
But honestly, the best thing to do is to give it the right habitat.
mm,
We need to, as a society, ensure that we have green spaces with the right native vegetation. That's actually a better thing to do than feeding them,
mm,
because if we feed them, we create an expectation in the animal as well that
mm.
everybody will be feeding it.
So, in your view, what are we doing to our or their habitations? How their habitations, habitats, the green areas, the forests, how are they being encroached upon? Under what pretext? Which is creating all these problems for these wildlife.
So, one thing is, of course, land use has changed, right? The way
Mm,
that we use land has changed. I'm sure
mm,
when you were growing up, you might have had a different experience
mm,
of the city in
mm,
terms of more open spaces, more
mm,
greenery. We need to decide, as public planning and as citizens that, we need to have open areas. We need to
mm,
have green areas. So cities like Bombay, which don't have so many,
mm,
forests like Delhi does, for
mm,
example, for them, the beach is very important. The
mm,
the sea is very important because that's their open area, right?
mm,
So
mm,
even we as people need open areas. We need green and blue spaces in cities,
mm,
and for animals as well. they have to negotiate a very difficult landscape because
mm,
they have to cross highways, which have very fast speeding cars. They have to
mm,
sometimes cross railways. They have to move in order to find food.
mm,
What we really need is a new idea of development in which you can have, the infrastructure you want
mm,
without sacrificing existing habitat. So,
mm,
right now we think it's okay to kind of make roads everywhere, to cut down trees for various projects, but let's try to think a little differently. So, if you're
mm,
making a road through a forest, why don't we elevate the road?
mm,
Uh, and so that the animals can cross underneath. It's been done
mm,
in a few places. It's been done in
mm,
NH7 in Madhya Pradesh. It's being done in Rajaji in Uttarakhand. It's something that needs to be done in other parts of India. If
mm,
you're making, a dam that's going to drown forest land, we need to think again. We need
mm,
to think of what is the price, what is the cost really of making these infrastructure projects. A lot of these infrastructure projects might be very old-fashioned
mm,
because right now, with climate change, with more storms, we are having more and more landslides, for example, in the
mm,
Himalayas and more floods. Is it a
mm,
good idea then to make dams in the Himalayas? Perhaps we
mm,
need to read. And typically dams come up in these fast-flowing rivers, which have a lot of forest land.
mm,
These are the untouched places. So when a dam is made, it drowns so many kilometers of forest. So we need to rethink. We need to
mm,
be a bit progressive in our ideas. Let's go back to the drawing board and
mm,
see that we ensure that habitat is protected.
mm,
And, of course, another way to look at it is let us try to see the landscape through the eyes of a tiger, through the eyes of an elephant. It basically needs safe passage to move
mm,
through. And can we give it that safe passage? Can we ensure we remove invasive
mm,
species, for example? So the
mm,
Vilaiti kikar in the Delhi Ridge, if we remove it and plant the right trees, there'll be many
mm,
more monkeys inside the Delhi Ridge, and they might not come out. Invasive species like lantana have destroyed elephant
mm,
habitat. Elephants don't eat lantana,
mm,
and all the nutritious stuff that they like to eat is getting taken over. So then we need to have lantana removal so that the forest itself can provide the
mm,
elephant with the food that it needs.
yeah.
Things like that. So planning in a way that ensures that we have green and blue spaces.
The habitat for the great Indian bustard has also declined a lot, isn't it? And I read in your book that, of course, this book is written a couple of years back, and that only
Yes.
100 of them are left in the wild.
Yes, it's so sad. This is a bird that has India in its name. It's called the Great Indian Bustard, named after
Mm,
India. It's a big bird, about 18 kilos, one of the heaviest flying birds on earth.
mm,
And it is a very unusual bird. It,
mm,
it flies over very long distances. It
mm,
likes a dry habitat. It was found all over the Deccan
mm,
Peninsula. It was found even in Uttar Pradesh. But because of relentless change of land
mm,
use, areas which were pasture lands or grasslands have been converted either to crop fields or they've been converted to housing or some other kind of land use. So the bird basically has nowhere to go. I
mm,
think the animals that live in forests perhaps are doing a little better than other animals or birds which have a different kind of habitat outside of the
mm,
sanctuaries, outside of
mm,
the protected areas. So now
mm,
we only have about 100 left, and
mm,
now you only find them in Rajasthan and a very small population in Gujarat. And the other huge threat is that there's solar plants that are coming up in these
mm,
places, which are very, very big.
mm,
And the wires that carry solar energy,
mm,
the bustard collides with them and
mm,
dies because it's not able to see them very well. So it's really, again, death by 1,000 cuts for this bird. And
mm,
we really need to act fast to save the habitat. So we have some birds in captivity in this conservation breeding center, but
mm,
what we need is to save the habitat. Solar power is great, but it should not come at the cost of the extinction of a species. So we
mm,
need to put all the solar plants in places that don't have busted habitat. We need to find areas maybe on rooftops, maybe utilize special economic zones and buildings that we already have to make solar
mm.
farms instead of making solar farms in large, over hundreds of kilometers in the desert.
Yeah, which people think that they are wastelands, but actually they are
Yeah.
not.
No, of course they're not. The fact that the desert looks dead to us is
mm,
really sad because we just have to look a little harder. It's
mm.
full of animals and plants which are adapted for that desert condition,
Yes, yes.
which cannot do well in other places.
Mm,
And if you see the desert after the monsoon, it's an incredible sight. It's full of
mm,
green grasses.
mm,
And even when it's not the monsoon, it looks brown. It looks
mm,
brown, but that brown also has life in it.
mm,
I would
mm,
say that brown is like a kind of green in itself
mm.
because
Wow.
it simply is the vegetation of
Mm,
the desert.
mm,
Not every tree can have lots of green leaves on it, but
mm,
that doesn't mean that the trees of the desert are not trees, right? So
mm,
we definitely need to have more ecological literacy. We were talking earlier about planning in a way that's
mm,
progressive for
mm,
environment as well. So even the planning projects, it's a very outdated idea to think that any natural place is a wasteland. No natural place is a wasteland. Places might get degraded by chemical use, but in a natural state, all of them are ecosystems and all of
yeah.
them require levels of protection.
You have some very nice, wonderful stories of different iconic animals of India. The
Yes.
butterfly, the Amur falcon, the crocodiles. I mean, I
Yes.
just don't know what all to talk about here. But yes, definitely I would like to talk about the dolphin because from the point of view that we live in Delhi or around Delhi, and I lived in Delhi also for 45 years, and
Right.
that dolphin used to exist in the Yamuna over there.
Yes, it did. It did. And
Uh,
the dolphin, for my readers from Bihar,
mhm.
the chapter really resonated
Mhm.
on that dolphins because they have seen dolphins.
Yes,
They
yes.
sit by the riverside of Ganga
Mm,
riverside and in the evening with their friends and they see dolphins jumping out of the water.
mm,
And
mm,
again, it comes down to what we've been exposed to and what we value.
mm,
So, it's in ecology, we call it generational amnesia. When you
mm,
forget something was there, if you completely forget it was there, so it becomes
mm,
normal if it's not there anymore, right?
mm,
So, like some people have seen sparrows, the younger generation may not have seen sparrows. So the
mm,
younger generation thinks it's normal to not have sparrows. So
mm,
I think our parents' generation might have seen many more dolphins than our generation.
mm,
And it's the dolphin is such an interesting animal because it most of the breeding population is in India. This is the Ganges River dolphin. And
mm,
therefore, India is very important for the future of the species. Just like the tiger,
mm,
most of the tigers of the world are in India. The dolphin is similar. Most of the dolphins, Gangetic River dolphins, are in India. And there's a dolphin that went extinct in China because of
mm,
river pollution and
mm,
disturbance in the river. Because it's an animal that we can't see very well, we can't hear very well, because
mm,
dolphins communicate using echolocation.
mm,
They communicate making these clicking sounds that we can't hear.
mm.
And because it lives in the water, so we're not able to see it all the time. So what happens is we often think that if you can't see something, that it's not there. But it is there in the water. And therefore, I think the river belongs to the dolphin as well. The Ganges River belongs to us, it belongs to fish, it belongs to dolphin. Whatever we do in the Ganges River and the other tributaries where the dolphins live should take into account the needs of the dolphin. So we cannot have too much disturbance. We cannot have too much underwater noise. Underwater noise really disturbs them.
That is
So basically,
from the new Waterways Act, which has declared them as
yes.
water
So,
as shipping
yes,
lanes.
exactly. So
Yeah.
there are ways to minimize underwater
Mm,
noise by
mm,
making some modifications to the hulls of the
mm,
ships or the boats.
mm,
We cannot have dynamite blasting. We cannot
mm,
have. We should try to avoid having too much traffic in areas where dolphins are breeding. For example, we
mm,
could think of seasonal, shipping in a way that avoids disturbing them while they're breeding. There are ways, again, that we can plan around this, but we have to start by recognizing that the river also belongs to the dolphin.
mm,
Because what we tend to do nowadays is that we just kind of decide to do our own thing, and then we get surprised if the animal doesn't do well. The dolphin is India's national aquatic animal. A lot of
Mhm.
people are very fond of them because
Mhm.
they are part of the landscapes of their childhood.
Mhm.
In fact, it was the Bihar chief minister at that point, Nitish Kumar, who had suggested that it should be made the aquatic animal, the national aquatic animal, because
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
Bihar has a relationship with the
Mm.
dolphin, and so do other states like West Bengal. And
Mm.
it's important for us to continue these traditions
Mm.
in which we place value on that animal, because the more industrialized we get, sometimes
Mm.
perhaps the more lonely we get as well, because we
Mm.
distance ourselves from everything else. And
Mm.
that's not a very ideal state of being. The
Mm.
more we explore the world around us, the more connected we feel towards, other
Mm.
living beings. I
Mm.
think the more rich our lives can be.
Mm. And you have written very beautifully, and I'm quoting from your book. My generation never saw a dolphin in Delhi. Perhaps the Yamuna still waits for the rediscovery of their identity in the national capital. Citations, not cruise ships. The dolphins of my mind are awake and playing. I
Yes,
marked it
yes.
out because it's so beautifully written and gives you hope that, maybe someday we would be seeing dolphins if we play our cards right.
Yes, absolutely. I always believe that there's hope because nature is resilient. We just need to
Mm.
give it a chance. I've seen dolphins in other parts of the Ganga, and
Mm.
maybe one day I will see them in Yamuna if we are able to
Mm.
clean up the river, if we are
Mm.
able to restore the flow of the water. In
Mm.
many parts of India, rivers are being restored. More water is going in by changing agricultural practices that reduce
Mm.
water use. We have more water in rivers, in some rivers today. The Karula River in Uttar Pradesh is a good example of restoration in which the
Mm.
farmers have changed agricultural practices, and that which basically puts in more water into the river,
Okay.
allows more water into the river, and also reduces pesticides. So pesticide is a huge pollutant.
Yes.
uh, Agricultural runoff is a huge pollutant in rivers. So
Mm.
there are ways, we just have to want that this should happen. We have to
Mm.
see it as something that's important.
Mm.
For too long, we've looked at nature as a very disposable thing,
Mm.
as something that doesn't need our attention. All our attention is on the economy. But I think if you don't have ecology, it's very hard to have economy. At the end of the day, we also need healthy lives.
Mm.
We also need lives which are, free from the kind of climate worry that many of us face today. So
Mm.
people who live near the coast now already, whether it's Bombay, whether it's Calcutta, whether it's Chennai, they're already reeling from impacts like cyclones, too
Yes.
much rain, flooding. We're already seeing the
Mm.
impacts of bad planning and climate change. So I think we need to look for a future and plan for a future and actively ask for a future which
Mm.
considers nature much more important than we do
Mm.
today.
Okay, just one more story I'm going to bring in now that is
Yeah,
of the Amur falcon and perhaps the crocodile story.
right.
Actually, just to illustrate the way the community has been motivated or empowered to let go of their habits and sort of adopt a more an attitude of conservation, especially in the
Right.
falcon's case. So what
Yes.
actually happened there? Yeah.
So, I mean, the community hunts,
Yeah.
usually hunting is a common thing that happens in
Mm.
Nagaland. It's part of their culture.
Mm.
But, they had a very, very industrial scale hunting of the Amur
Mm.
falcon, because the Amur falcon had started coming in large numbers to
Mm.
particular villages in Nagaland.
Mm.
So, as ornithologists, we kind of thought that, if this kind of hunt at this number continues, like if you're hunting 10,000 birds a day, then
Mm.
there won't be much left of the
Mm.
species.
Mm.
And there are examples of birds that used to be very plentiful that are
Mm.
extinct today.
Mm.
An example is the passenger pigeon of the United States, which was
Mhm.
in very, very high numbers. And it got hunted, and it's an extinct species today. So basically, the land is owned by the community, and
Mm.
the community, I always believe, one cannot tell them what to do. One has to
Mm.
take them along,
Mm.
and hopefully we can create a plan which is made together. So what we
Mm.
did is we went there, we would have a lot of meetings, we would tell them about the Amur falcon. It's a bird that migrates from Russia and comes to India, and then it moves to Africa. It has a very long migration.
Mhm.
It eats a lot of insects. It comes to Nagaland after the monsoon when there are lots of insects. And it's this beautiful bird, basically, beautiful,
Mhm.
interesting bird. And so
Mhm.
we started talking to the community and we said, how can we help you in a way that, you can consider protecting the species? And they all said that, first of all, they didn't know it was a migratory bird. And it really
Mhm.
kind of touched their hearts that
Mhm.
it's coming from so far away,
Mhm.
it goes so
Mhm.
far. And also, when we appeal to their, we appeal to them, we said these are the facts. Now you can decide what you want to do.
Mhm.
And they took it upon themselves to become protectors. And
Mhm.
we started eco clubs in the villages. We started giving education, basically scientific education to the children to supplement what they were learning
Mhm.
in school. And that was kind of like the community really enjoyed having that exposure to the outside world, having their children study science. And I had so many of the parents telling me that we want our kids to become IFS officers, we want our
Mhm.
kids to do science and do
Mhm.
conservation, which is not something that was an option for them earlier.
Mhm.
So it was a slow process, but it worked because they decided that
Mhm.
they want to do something else now. So I had people telling me, you know me as a hunter, I'd like you to know me differently now. And also, we tried to create some ecotourism so that they can have some supplementary livelihood as well, because some of them were selling the Amur falcons and getting money out of it. So obviously, if one is telling them not to do something which is a source of income, then one has to try to find a substitute.
Mhm.
We helped them liaise with the government to avail some government schemes. And that's often the role that non-governmental organizations have, in which they try to streamline processes, because the government actually does have a lot of schemes.
Mhm.
People don't know how to use the
Yes,
schemes, or the
yes.
government officials don't know how
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
don't know where to take the schemes. So
Mhm.
we try to be the licensing factor. And with all these things combined, the people decided to give up hunting. And today, those villages are known as places that protect the Amur falcon. So it's a beautiful conservation story. And it's
Yeah.
very bottoms up. It's not,
Yeah, exactly. That's what was so unique about it, that and
Yes,
people did
yes,
everything so willingly.
yes, yes, yes.
So, in the end, could you encapsulate the lessons for for us as ordinary citizens? How should we perceive the more visible part of wildlife to ensure that we do not do any harm to them and do not also get harmed ourselves? So, what are the lessons for us?
I think one of the biggest lessons is that we are a part of this world and we're not owners of this world. We
Mhm.
often behave as if we own the entire world, but we really don't. And, as the climate changes, I think we might begin to feel a little smaller, a little bit more humbled by the forces of nature, and by the fact that, slowly the planet also seems to be becoming a little bit harder to live in terms
Mhm.
of the intense heat, in terms of the intense weather events that are happening all around the world, and in India as well. I think maybe that might help us become a bit more sensitive, a bit more respectful towards nature, really. For
Mhm.
people like me who walk in the forest,
Mhm.
it's very humbling. And I think the problem comes when people have disconnected themselves from nature. We
Mhm.
kind of forget that we too are animals and we need to be in nature for our own health. So when people are walking in a park, it's because they are enjoying being out in the fresh air or being out near plants. Being near plants is very important for mental health. People who garden are known to be happier and live longer lives than people who don't, for example. So I think the disconnect with urbanity has happened because we are more dedicated to our screens than we are dedicated to sunsets and the
Mhm.
outdoors.
Mhm.
And the lesson then is to pay more attention to the outside world, to nature. And you don't have to love nature, but at least we can start by respecting it a bit more, because
Mhm.
all so much of what we do comes from nature. Even the
Mhm.
cotton that we wear,
Mhm.
cotton is a plant that self-pollinates, but a lot of it is also pollinated by bees and by butterflies. So we actually depend on nature a lot more than we think.
Mm,
Of course, our
mm,
food comes from, the soil, right?
mm,
And I think, the more we degrade nature, the more it comes back to us. It degrades us as well. So if we have too much chemicals in the soil, that's in our food now.
mm,
Too much plastic in the environment, that's in our bodies now. So
mm,
what I'm trying to say is that we need to rediscover our connections with nature.
mm,
That's probably the most important thing. An easy way to start is by having a few native plants in our gardens or
mm,
balconies or verandas and observing birds and butterflies that come on them. Or going to a nearby wilderness, going to a nearby sanctuary and spending a day outdoors. And just by observing something like a bird
mm,
or an animal, I think it can really change the life of a person because it is a life that's quite different from ours. We are so obsessed with our salaries and our appraisals and
mm,
our kind of rat race that we've forgotten that we actually are not meant to just be running around money. We're
mm,
also meant to appreciate life, which includes an appreciation of nature, which includes being outdoors, learning how to walk on a slope, learning how to balance our bodies. All of this is connected with being
mm,
outdoors. And I
mm,
think just starting with observation is a beautiful way to reconnect with nature. So please go to your nearby wetland or nearby forest or nearby sanctuary,
mm.
uh, go for walks and observe the birds. Delhi has more than 400 bird species. It is
Wow,
the second most bird-rich capital on earth.
really?
So, yes, so please go to Okla
Mm,
Sanctuary
yeah.
in winter. Please go to
Mm.
Sultanpur Sanctuary in Haryana.
I
The
have the Surajpur bird sanctuary right next door, but I have not been
Yes,
there
you
yet.
must go. You must go. Just
Yeah.
please go. And the birds you see have
Mm,
come from Central Asia. Some of
mm,
those birds have crossed the Himalayas to be in
mm.
Surajpur. So it's
Nice.
amazing. Animals lead very hard lives. And,
Mm,
if we get to know a little bit, the more
mm,
people know about
mm,
animals, I think the more they appreciate them. So I
mm,
think going outdoors is the first thing. And the second thing is just finding that respect for nature that I think generations before us always had that respect.
mm,
I think it kind of got a little cut off for some of us because we maybe grew up in more urban areas.
mm.
And yes, we don't own the earth, we are just one part of it. We're pretty much at
Yeah.
the mercy of
Mm.
weather and, nature. So let's be respectful.
So how do we get to know which are the native species? Like I've struggled with that. Is
Right.
it do we go online and search or go to a nursery or?
Absolutely. You can go to the government nurseries, which will
Mm,
give away plants for free.
mm,
Most of those plants are native plants. You don't
mm,
have to pay for them even.
mm,
There are certain websites and online resources.
mm,
So, for example, Aravali Biodiversity Park in Gurgaon has
mm,
an Instagram page.
mm,
The chief scientist Vijay Dhasmana has an Instagram page. He's always posting
mm,
educational material on native plants.
mm,
There are many nature trails that WWF India does,
mm,
and almost every weekend. So one can go
mm,
along on those nature trails and see the native plants that the naturalists will show you.
mm,
There's something as the ecosystem ERA. So I think
mm,
it's Ecosystem Restoration Alliance.
mm, mm,
ERA, they have a website which has a lot of resources on native
mm,
plants and
mm,
shrubs and trees.
mm,
So one can follow all these organizations and individuals to get educated. And it's
mm,
never too late to start.
mm. So, on that note, and with so much of valuable information, Neha, I'd like to thank you for being on a podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad you enjoyed Wild and Wilful.
Yes, yes, I did. And would you like to give any contact details?
So I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram. It's Neha
Mm,
underscore Sinha in
mm,
both Twitter and
mm,
Instagram.
mm,
So readers usually connect with me
mm,
over here.
mm,
And anybody who reads the book is welcome to reach out to me on Twitter
mm,
and Instagram.
mm. And what I'm carrying away from this is that, on behalf of all the listeners, is that If you see a wild animal in your vicinity, or if you know of a wild animal who's around you, for example, a snake which can creep into your house sometimes, is not to think of them as an enemy and look for ways to get them back into their habitat rather than find somebody to kill them, isn't it?
Absolutely agree. And if
Yeah.
it's a snake, then please call a rescuer. Don't try
Mm,
to, do anything on your own. There are
mm,
many rescuers now. Every
mm,
city has a rescuer. We
mm,
just have to be a little patient, maybe
mm,
lock the room. And
mm,
I think it might seem very inconvenient in the short term, but
mm,
in the long run, as I said,
mm,
learning to be tolerant to all animals
mm,
actually gives us so many life lessons. I have
mm,
learned patience in
mm,
life as a life skill by observing butterflies, and I write
mm.
about that in the book, that
Yes, yes.
it's hard because they keep flying all the time. It's so hard to
Yeah.
take their photo, to observe them. But really, Ranjit,
Mm,
being patient is one of the most important qualities of
mm,
adult life.
mm,
Being patient in any situation, whether it's a traffic jam, whether it's a bad Zoom connection, whether it's a bad
mm,
internet connection, we have to learn how to be patient. And I learned
mm,
that by observing animals and the so-called inconvenience that
mm.
sometimes they can pose. If we are tolerant and patient towards that, I think
Mm.
it's a life lesson.
And from your story of butterflies, I really realized that how resilient a butterfly would be, because it
Yes.
goes through so many stages of its life. Fighting
Yes.
danger, fighting off insects, fighting off birds, and then emerging as
Yes.
a butterfly. And then you look at a war-torn area, you will find a butterfly. You look at any devastation, there will be butterflies.
Yes, I found butterflies in Bastar, which had a lot of red violence. And when you're a butterfly, everything is out to eat you, whether
Mm,
it's a bird or even a mammal, everything. You're weak. You have no
mm,
defense. A butterfly has no defense, and a
mm,
butterfly has such a soft body. And
mm,
whether it's a storm or whether it's a bird or whether it's a person, they also get run over by cars a lot because
mm,
they like to sit on warm surfaces because
mm,
butterflies are cold-blooded. So they like to sit on the warm surface of a road and they get run
mm,
over by cars.
mm,
So, yes, it's a very hard life and it's like a
mm,
champion, really,
mm,
in the way that it survives and the
mm,
way that it's able to live. And which is why if we still see butterflies amidst
mm,
us,
mm.
it's a sign that, things can be okay. That's how I see it.
And we think that we are very strong.
Yeah,
Very.
I know. Yes. No, actually, we don't
Yeah.
have so many attempts made on our life in the way some animals
Mm,
have. Yeah.
mm. Okay, so on that note, again, thank you so much. Yeah,
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ranjit, for having me. All the best.
thank you, and all the best to you as well, and for your future books as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Well, listeners, that was Neha Sinha talking about her book, Wild and Wilful, and throwing some light on how we treat our animal life. Hope you found it interesting. If you did, please follow on your preferred listening platform and share the podcast. And do let us know if there is any particular topic or author on whom you would like us to do a podcast. You can write to me at podcast@raymondproductions.org. That is RAMONPRODUCTIONS.org. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening to Books and Us. This is Ranjit Monga signing off. Till next time, goodbye and take care.